Hello everyone, my name's Luka and today I'll be giving a short presentation on my current research project. First, I'll talk about my motivation for choosing this topic, then I'll outline the scope of my project, define my main research question, and finally discuss one of my primary texts in a bit more detail to give you an idea of how I'll approach it. I've always been interested in medieval literature, especially legends, myths, and texts from the French and Norman traditions. In the summer of last year, I spent some time in Normandy and visited the town of Bayeux, where the Bayeux tapestry is displayed. It depicts the Norman conquest under William the Conqueror, and this experience really reignited my interest in the history and literature of this period, also known as Anglo-Norman period. Then I began looking more closely at some of the earliest romances written in Middle English, many of which were inspired or directly translated from Anglo-Norman and French sources. These romances broadly fall into what are known as the three matters. The matter of Britain, which focuses on King Arthur and his knights. We've got texts such as Sir Tristram, history books as well, Historia Regum Britanniae, which is a pseudo-history book. The matter of France, which is centred on Charlemagne and his knights. For example, we've got La Chanson de Roland and adaptations, Otuel and Roland. And we've also got the matter of Rome, which draws on classical history and legend, such as the Roman de Troyes. The romance genre was therefore adapted for English audiences, and this process has been the subject of critical debate for decades. These texts were not simply translated, they were reshaped for new audiences, and they exist in a trilingual context of French, Latin, and English, and some even circulated more widely across Europe. Many romances modify courtly ideals, draw on pseudo-history, myth, legend, and the supernatural. So at first I had too many texts and topics in mind, but with the help of my supervisor I was able to narrow this down and find a more precise direction for my research. In the main part of this presentation, I'll introduce my chosen primary text, I will outline my research question, and I'll show you how I approach one of the primary texts. I'll do a close reading. So, I'm particularly interested in the use and framing of love and the supernatural in relation to language and translation, as well as form and style where necessary. So my research question is, in what ways do translation, language and poetic form shape the portrayal of love and the supernatural in Anglo-Norman and Middle English romance? What does this reveal about changing cultural values in a trilingual context? So I want to find out whether love and the supernatural are presented differently in Middle English translations and adaptations, and let's assume that they are because of changing cultural values. And all of a sudden, these works are written in a vernacular language for both lower and upper classes. Many critics have wrongly assumed that Middle English versions of the same French romances are inferior or less sophisticated. However, many of them actually change the plot, they add satire, and they add nuances that earlier critics hadn't really picked up on. I would like to demonstrate this with an example from one of my primary texts. And my primary texts are, as you can see, Otuel and Knight from the Auchinleck manuscript, Sir Tristram from the Auchinleck manuscript, and Roland and Venagu also from the Auchinleck manuscript, as well as the Song of Roland, which is the original version of the Song of Roland. Roland and Venagu is a later adaptation, and I could use it for comparison. So let's take a closer look at Sir Tristram from the Auchinleck manuscript, which is a reworking of the legend of Tristan and Isolde. Sir Tristram, as Alan Lupak argues, was believed to be a poorly constructed abridgment of Thomas's courtly version or a coarsened version for a less sophisticated English audience, but in reality, it's a deliberate parody of the received version. And I will demonstrate this with a passage. This is the scene where Tristram and his aunt drink the magic potion, which was mistakenly given to them. It was intended for King Mark. So the satire here is in the moment where the hound also licks the cup and falls madly in love with them. So it becomes a tragic comedy, almost like a comedy of errors. With the help of my supervisor, I now know how to ask the right questions when tackling a passage like this. For example, what role do love potions play in other similar romances? What's the role of the hound? What did the final two lines, "In evil time the drink was wrought," say about this? It's not a pure moment of courtly love. It's not idealized. Does the supernatural potion represent fate, providence, or something more tragic? The legend does, after all, as we know, end tragically. So these are the kinds of questions I'm working with when approaching the text. So to conclude, I want to present one issue that I've encountered and find very difficult to analyse. It's translation and how translation reflects audience expectations and cultural values from a period that is very different from our own. This links directly to the second part of my research question. Critics seem to agree that translation is not purely linguistic, but it's also cultural. Georgievich argues that the relationship between audience and linguistic medium is anything but simple. And in the case of medieval English romances, the situation is even more complex because we've got two vernacular languages used in the first 2 or 3 centuries after the conquest. We've got English and Norman French. And this complexity, as she says, has not always been taken into account by literary scholars. I want to take it into account, and hopefully I will be able to do so. So this shows that language in medieval England is closely tied to audience and cultural context, rather than being a simple process of translation. Thank you for listening.